And President Joe Biden spoke earlier this week in a moment where he seemingly called Trump supporters garbage. White House officials went in high gear to walk it back. Now, the Associated Press reports that White House press officials altered the transcript of the call that the president had with Latino activists on Tuesday, in which he said, quote, "The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters." The transcript released by the White House press office had the quote written with an apostrophe, which aides said pointed to comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, who referred to Puerto Rico as a, quote, floating island of garbage during Trump's mega rally at Madison Square Garden last week. According to an internal email from the head of the stenographer's office that was obtained by the AP, the change to the transcript was made after the press office conferred with the president. The email's authenticity was confirmed by two anonymous government officials.
According to AP, one of the people on the email called the press office's handling of the matter a, quote, breach of protocol and spoliation, which is a word I love so much I'm going to say it again, the spoliation of transcript integrity between the stenography and press offices. Our stenography office transcript, released to our distribution list, which includes the National Archives, is now different than the edited version and released to the public by press office staff. Well, here's a problem for President Biden and for Kamala Harris that the White House seems to be strangely hell-bent on extending by doing these kinds of things. They do say in politics that it's the cover-up that tends to hurt you as much as the initial deed. Here we are with another day of talking about this because of the insertion of the magic apostrophe, as I have christened it, into the transcript. I think it's a dumb thing to do. I know that they would have taken heat had they released the transcript without the apostrophe, but on the other hand, Karine Jean-Pierre or whoever could have just stood up at the podium and said, well, we think otherwise, and that would have been that. And instead, it has become this thing where now it's about the White House meddling with transcripts.
Yes, this is definitely a prolonged scandal because of their interference, and we talked about this earlier this week about how they do have a penchant for editing transcripts from Joe Biden, in a lot of cases to make them easier to read, because he does have these moments where he sort of stumbles over the teleprompter and goes off on tangents or what have you. But in other cases, in ways that actually change the matter of what he was saying. A perfect example of this, I brought this up earlier this week. He was speaking at the NAACP dinner. He said that he was VP during the pandemic, and the White House had actually crossed out pandemic in the transcript and put recession in brackets next to it. This is something they've done hundreds of times since Biden took office, and it undermines the meaning of what a transcript is, which is not, we're taking the speech that Biden was supposed to deliver and then sending it out afterwards because that's what he said. It's actually supposed to be what he said.
Yeah, and here I'm going to speak up for a very little known part of the White House bureaucracy, which is the transcript office. They take that job very seriously, as they should. They understand that it has been done for the historical record. As someone who's been in the White House briefing room at times and struggled to hear what other journalists have said, and has later looked at the transcript that is produced, they're very good at capturing verbatim exactly what happens. And here, that email that the AP got would indicate that they did communicate exactly what the president said, and that proved politically problematic, we surmise, from the press office's perspective, and was then changed. I know the argument is it's only an apostrophe. The point is, it is changing the reality to comport with a preferred political imperative, and I think that is a problem.
And the fact that they talked to Biden before they finalized the transcript is a huge part of this too, because then he basically gets veto power over all of his gaffes.
What I really meant was...
Right, that's not what I meant to say, so don't put it in the transcript. I mean, that is a legitimate scandal, and of course, one of my favorite media trends that has been happening for the past 10 years, let's say, is the Republican seize or the Republicans pounce, where the reaction to the scandal is made to be the scandal rather than the scandal itself. And I see a lot of that happening in this case, where they're like, well, Trump is seizing on Biden calling his supporters garbage by rolling up in the garbage truck, or Trump supporters are dressing up in garbage bags with MAGA hats for Halloween, pouncing on Joe Biden's comments where he had don't worry, he totally had an apostrophe in there. But I think they have reason, especially considering this new information from the Associated Press, to be offended by what Joe Biden said.
No, I think they do. So my sort of position on this, so to speak, is I do think they have legitimate reason to be offended. I do think it's a serious matter to start meddling with the transcripts of what a President of the United States says. Not defending that at all. I also think on the political or electoral level, it's a dumb thing to do because, as I say, it prolongs a story which is very bad from Biden's perspective and therefore, by extension, from Harris's perspective. Now, the bigger point I would make, I guess, to a degree in defense of the overall picture is this now becomes the story rather than genuinely serious issues that Harris would have preferred to be pressing, whether that was the economy, whether it was protection of democracy. The speech at the Ellipse has now been almost forgotten, despite the fact it was, 2.5 days ago. These were things that I do think are absolutely legitimate for her to raise as part of her election campaign as we enter these final days. And they have now been eclipsed, washed away, obscured, whatever you want to call it, by this thing.
Yeah, very true. Another October surprise, I guess you could call it.
Too many October surprises. We got an October surprise with that Madison Square Garden rally, where I think that Trump and particularly the comedian were rightfully criticized, I would argue, and then we got the October surprise, the sequel with all this.
Right, and that's the other downside of this is in addition to washing away or distracting from Kamala Harris's policy pitch, which I would argue is not very good anyway, but of course that's a whole other segment. But it also obscured the original joke from the comedian at Madison Square Garden that became the subject of such ire.
Enabled Trump to turn the page on that.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, we have a lot more to cover here on Rising. Please stick around. We'll be right back.